Okay, greetings again for another blog by Mr. Freedom, yours truly. I got a different view here of my backyard from the first three blogs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my father, good old dad. He was born in 1914. About 5 years after my grandfather came over from Italy, and my father was born with a midwife. My grandfather had come over thinking, like most people, that the country was paved in gold. Got to New York City, no job, broke, pregnant wife, and either a couple of kids or one kid. And my grandmother had one little connection in Syracuse, New York. I don't know how. So they jumped on a train from Grand Central Station and they got into Syracuse. So as I said, my father was born with a midwife, and he didn't get along too well with my grandfather. My grandfather was, without getting into any boring details, wasn't a very nice fella. A lot of issues. And when I'm sure growing up in Italy, whatever, he must have had obviously a pretty bad childhood himself. Or anyway, my father was, he was 14 years old and he quit school. But before he did, back then there was no TV, of course, and he was a radio show, and my father was really, really into the arts. I'll get into that in a minute. So he wrote a little script for the radio show when he was like 13 years old. Sent the script to Hollywood and got a letter back saying that this is pretty amazing for a 12-year-old boy. And if he ever gets to Hollywood, to look the fella up. And so, as fate would have it, about 1936, my father was 22 years old. He got married, and they went to Los Angeles on their honeymoon, and did the whole circuit, the whole Hollywood tourist thing. But he walked into the studio and met this fella, and the guy remembered him, and turned out from his connections, my father got a job with doing a lot of public relations work for Paramount Studios. And it was amazing. We got a book home of all these, in those days it was Polaroid cameras. Not only had like an 8x10 glossy picture of every movie star in Hollywood in the 1930s, that was all signed to my father personally. They used to hang out at this drugstore up in Melrose Boulevard, waiting for acting parts, and father'd hang out with them. And so he's really excited. He's in LA. He actually wanted to be a movie producer. Actually, I think he told me, or a director. So around 1938, he gets drafted. World War II was on the horizon. So he goes back to Syracuse and flunks the draft because he was half blind in his left eye. And my mother did not want to go back to Los Angeles with him, or didn't want to go back to LA, so really frustrated, he stayed in Syracuse. And even though he worked in another blog, I explained how he started a business in 1949. Between 1938 and 1949, he just worked about every possible job you could imagine. And when he made it in the sauce business, I remember everybody told me, he would make it in 1953, bought a 1953 dark green with beautiful light tan snap down convertible Eldorado with the wheel in the back. He got out of that car looking like Frank Sinatra, like Clark Gable, all dressed up and immaculate, looking up and down the street like, who's a really stupid person now. So I remember as a child, I was born in 43, and so by 1949, 1951, 52, my father was getting to be a pretty wealthy man, and we always had Christmas Eve dinner. All the grandparents would just, and the aunts would just, for 2-3 days just cook and cook and cook, and the entrees were unbelievable. And right next door, 2 doors down, was my uncle lived, and my grandfather his father and mother lived in the backyard there in a little studio apartment. And we'd always have Christmas Eve where the country was doing so well, and people were making such good money compared to the standard of living, that we actually got presents from every single aunt and uncle for Christmas. Everybody bought gifts. Every aunt and uncle bought gifts for every other aunt and uncle. And my father had 6 brothers and sisters, so that's a lot of presents we got from a lot of people. And it was the happiest time, Christmas time. I remember as a child with my father. My father he loved Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and stuff, and he would put those songs on playing all the time. In fact, at his funeral in 2006, I sang "Memories Are Made of This" by Dean Martin. Had many of the family in tears, and like my son said to me, and a couple other people, that actually got an ovation at a funeral service in a church. People actually clapped. Everybody clapped. That was pretty interesting. I remember, like, I was African people and European American people. Wasn't really. I mean, the civil rights thing wasn't until 1963. So earlier than that, in the late 50s, it was like my father. He wasn't really bigoted, but it was just like, there was no black people in his life. And then on national television, Frank Sinatra kissed Lena Horne on TV, and all of a sudden, my father's. If Frank Sinatra could do it, then it was certainly something that he could do, and it was amazing to watch that. So he was really good. My father really, like 1953 and 1955. 1953, he drove us all across the country to my godfather's house in California. We spent the whole summer at the Pacific Ocean, and 1955 and 1956, 57, he rented us a house down to the Jersey Shore, played in the ocean for the whole summer there too. It was really amazing, having that kind of a child. I remember not wanting to leave my friends because they're all playing baseball in the park, and now when I look back at it, I'm so happy. It was like it was really like just a blessing to be able to. So I graduated in high school in 1961, started college, and let me get back to when my father quit school. I mentioned it on another blog about there was a Gothic structure bank right next to the Erie Canal. It was the Erie Canal came from Buffalo, and they used to bring all merchandise from Buffalo straight across Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, and then it went south to New York City. So any stuff that came in from the Great Lakes from Europe down through the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Erie Canal would come down through and down to New York to unload. And so it could have gone into New York City, but probably the things were bringing stuff through Canada and down to Chicago, Illinois, and then through the Great Lakes, and then the last Great Lake was where the Buffalo was. I think it was, Lake Erie. And then it was one of the Great Lakes. Syracuse was probably 60 miles from the Lake Ontario, one of the Great Lakes, which is pretty cool. We used to always go to this place called Sandy Pond. So my father just was shining shoes, and I could just see like it was a picture like some of the Italian movies, like this little Italian kid, 14 years old, like shining shoes next to this Gothic structure with the Erie Canal going through. Just a real, I'd love to see that site. It must have been really nice. So, as I said, I graduated. So, when I get to college, I started college in 1961. My father was like, I joined this fraternity called the Decals. My father was a real renegade. He used to, it was interesting, at Syracuse University was a Baptist college, and they didn't let us drink and dance in the same room. God only knows why. And so we'd have to drink in one room and then go with our date, dance, come back to the drink. So, we didn't want to put up with any of that nonsense. So we had illegal parties. And so we'd have to get a chaperone of a parent in town and a professor. And there was this really gay professor in the drama department that really loved us because we were real not judging him for who he was. And so we always put his name down as one of the chaperones, and we'd always put my father as the other one because my father loved it. So we'd get a couple of kegs and we'd rent some hall that the university never knew, and we'd just party there while we were telling them we were partying somewhere else with chaperones. That's the way we did it. My father was really, really like. So it turned out, because my father was the president of a corporation, when I was in the Decals my senior year, I just wanted to be president, just so I could show him, this, as I said before in another blog, this dysfunctional, wanting to get my father's love. So it took a lot of political stuff. There was a fella that was, his father was in the John Kennedy White House. He was the chairman of the home and loan banks across the country. So Jody really knew how to manipulate political elections, and he got me elected. Well, sure enough, and I'm the last person who wanted to be president. I mean, I was like running around like crazy, man, drunk 4 nights a week. So we threw a party that was so severe and crazy that we were the only fraternity house at Syracuse that was allowed to not have a chaperone in the house. And after that party, we were forced to have a chaperone. The chaperone catches 4 of my buddies playing poker in the room, turns them into the dean of men, and they get thrown out of school. I was like livid when I walked into the house and heard about it, so I went up to the chaperone and lit into him like big time. So the local alumni wanted to impeach me as the president. They found out the only way you could impeach is if I gave away secrets. I forgot, a long story. They couldn't impeach me. They did throw me out of the house. I was living at the fraternity house. So I'm back at my house, and I love that. I'm back home in my bedroom that I lived in when I was in high school, out in the country. We lived outside of the city of Syracuse. So it was really beautiful. So I'm thinking about just quitting, I don't care. They already took the composite picture, so my picture was going to be shown as the president for eons and eons years later. And so all the pictures were always there at the house, just back 30, 40 years. So my picture's still there probably. So my father hears, my mother must have told my father, so I'm lying in bed and I hear familiar footsteps come down the stairs. And I knew it was going to be a classic because my father probably came down the stairs 10 times in 30 years. So I knew. So I'm trying not to laugh. I got my covers over my bed. He gives me a whack, I go, what? He goes, don't quit. You make them impeach you. And walks out down the hallway out the door. So I just got a chuckle out of that. And so I graduate from Syracuse, and my father throws this huge, incredible champagne party out by the swimming pool in the backyard. And as I was an economics major, and I had flunked economics 100B with calculus formulations with economic theory and statistics. I flunked those too, and instead of taking those over, I just took electives. So I'm figuring when we're having this party, they're going to send me a letter saying I didn't qualify to be an economics major, and I'm going to have to do another whole year or 2 years of another major. And I'm only went to college for my father, and I was so happy it was done. So I remember walking to the mailbox 2 months later, and and I nervously opened up the letter, and there's my diploma. And the thought in the back of my mind was, it was all about the money. That's all they wanted was the cash. Which gave me a little inkling of when I rebelled 4 or 5 years later. Anyway, I was all set we were going to go out to California. I remember a couple of buddies fell through, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, except I knew I wanted to be an artist in the back of my mind. I just didn't have enough confidence yet to do it, which in another blog that came later when I got to California in 1970. So I figured I'd work for my father for a little bit, and one of the days I was driving an XKE Jaguar for my private car, and one day I got caught speeding coming through town, and the cop pulled me over, and he's walking to the car, and I knew he's got these little old police cars, not going to be able to catch me. As soon as he gets to the window, I rolled up the window, threw it in first gear, and like that Jaguar used to lift up like this, down the road. But I was so nervous, I drive 4 blocks, rip into my grandmother's driveway. She lived in town. And instead of turning the lights off and hiding the car, I'd left the lights on and just ran out of the car, called my father. Long story short, he drove the Jaguar for the next couple of weeks, and I drove his big Cadillac. And every night I'd see him come home from work at 6 o'clock. There's a couple of cops following him to see if I'm going to be in the car. But I remember one thing my father did, which is really beautiful for the family. My mom's mom was Greek. We were all Italian except for my mom's mom, and she came over here when she was 16 years of age. I'll get into more of that with a blog about my mother, but he sponsored him into town. Let me get into that. I'll get into that with the blog from my mom. So I graduate from college, like I said, and I'm working for him for 4 or 5 years, and then the other blog you'll see of another whole point. So it was really funny because in 1971, when I did go back after I got this really, really long hair and a beard, this is telling funny stories about my father. Charlie Manson, I'm not going to get into the details, but he was pretty gruesome what he did out in Los Angeles. And he had long hair and a beard. So I remember when I came home in 1971, I used to come home and I always spent a couple months with my mother and father. Lived in a nice studio out in the backyard. I'd live in the studio. And every time I'm at the house, I'm talking to people, I'd look over to my father and I could see nothing but fear on his face. And it finally dawned on me, like he's concerned about, am I going to murder the entire family? So when I was alone with him later on in the evening, I looked at him, eyeball to eyeball, and I said, "Pop, not my MO. You're safe. Don't worry about it." And we looked each other deep into the eyes, and he understood that I'm not interested in killing anybody. I forgot to mention it, when I was working for him, after 2.5 years, I quit after 4.5, but around 2 years in, he was just being so rude and just disrespectful to me. And I said to him, "What do you think? you're the only person I can work for. So I'm so angry. I walk into called Syracuse University, and I said, I graduated 2 years ago. Can I still take interviews? They said, sure, there's a 3-year period, you can do it. So I said, what's your next interview? They go, the New York Times. So I said, I'll take it. So I fly down to New York City, and I don't really want the job. I just want to get hired. So I'm loose. I'm really loose, and boom, let's go. So the interview come in. Long story short, I get past the first guy, second guy. I think I'm around the third guy, and we're sitting there, and he's looking over me, and my father and I used to dress. My father, I always wanted to be like my dad when we were working, so we used to buy cloth from Hong Kong, and we used to make one button was in the Italians, one button suits, and tailor made, and I'd have them all just physically made to me. The knee was a certain length. Had a tailor, we made suits. So he sent me, this New York Times guy see me with a one button suit, and the only resume I had was I worked for my father, and of course they figured he could lie, so they're not sure of me. But I was so confident to get the job because I was motivated by just wanting to show my father. So guy says to me, the last thing I remember, the one thing I remember now, there's a couple of things, we're going through back and forth the interviews. So the guy says to me, okay, well, if we do hire you, do you have any objection about going downstairs where we make the papers and see how it's done before you go out on the street for interviews and things? So I said to the guy, so wait, hold on. I said, I worked in a spaghetti sauce factory since I've been in high school. I worked all through high school. And I saw everything from top to bottom, how the paste came in, everything. The only difference is you make newspapers downstairs. It's the same kind of production line. So I said, I don't really need to do that. So him and Han, and I said, look, why don't you do this? Give me a pad and paper. Set me out to the street. If I get tell me the interview you want. If it's a good interview, I get the job. If it's not an interview, I'm not going to waste any more of your time. I'll leave. So he's looking at me like, he said, okay, we'll think about it. Pretty certain we like you and blah, blah, blah. So something about the vibration, I knew I had the job. So I couldn't care less about going downstairs, arguing anymore about that point. So I leave. I go party with my girlfriend in New York City, who I was dating at the time. Flew back to Syracuse, and about a week later, the letter comes in, and my father comes in mockingly, like, okay, what's your, here, open. I said, why don't you open it up, Bob? I said, I'm busy, I'm on the phone. And while he's opening up at his desk, I lean back on my chair, look out my door, and I see him, and he opens up the window, and the accountant's there with him, and he looks at it, he just couldn't believe it, that I got hired by the New York Times. And so I walk in, I was a drinker in those days, I walk in, and I'm mixing some ice in, making myself a scotch and water for lunch. And I said hello to the accountant, laughing, smiling, and the accountant really laughing because everybody that my father did business with, they liked him. But they always liked to just stick it to him because he was such a domineering type person, So they liked to get back at him. So the fact that I got hired, the guy was shaking my hand put a big smile on his face that my father couldn't see. That was another story. So it was like yeah, like I said, actually saying, no, I covered that part. So, I think that's going to be it for this blog. I'm going to probably have a little bit more later on down the road. Oh, yeah. 2 years before he died, my father never gave me a hug the entire time he was... my old man was larger than life. He was sexually molested when he was a young kid, and he told my sister actually about 6 months before he passed away. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with his insecurity. He just was like, but he was, I mean, the guy was 86, 87 years old. I used to walk into the kitchen and he'd have all the newest music being played, like Janet Jackson going, you know. Like I said, he always, even though he made millions and millions of dollars, he just wasn't a happy camper because his love was wanting to be a movie producer. And that was a really strong lesson for me. And that fact that you gotta really, I mean, people used to say to me, oh, you know, you got it made, blah, blah, your family's got money and stuff like that. I'd say, you know, like, yes, it's like we had money, it's better than being broke. I'm not gonna lie. Except it does not bring happiness. The only thing that brings happiness is happiness. You're either happy or you're not happy. Money doesn't make you happy. Just, it makes you eat, get insurance, be able to put gas in your car while you're unhappy. It's better than being unhappy and broke and not eating properly. It doesn't bring happy. And my father was never a happy camper. It was like, I remember one time we were in high school, and we're down by the pool, and we're all having a good time. And I'd see my father driving the driveway, and he's just this really down look on his face, you know. So, you know, I'm like, back then I was like, Elvis Presley and Marlon Brando were like my heroes. Little Richard in the back of my mind, but because he was black, I had to go with the white guy, you know, the real good looking guy. But when I look back at it now, Little Richard was the guy that really moved me musically. Elvis a little, but nothing like Little Richard. And even Bob Dylan, sang Little Richard songs in high school. He got affected by him. And when he got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he thanked Little Richard. Little Richard was powerful. So my father's got this down look on his face. So I walk up, I go, "You're the head patriarch here. Why aren't you happy? I mean, you're the one that's got all the cash. I just take money from you." And he's, well, you know, the business is this and that, you know. So that's when, 4 high school summers, I could have been at the beach, you know, running around the beach and meeting girls and having a great old time. And I actually walked into my father's warehouse for 4 summers. And the reason being is because he was so domineering, and I wanted to please him. I wanted to help him because he was so sad, that I actually gave up 4 summers in high school. And the first summer was like, I said, well, look, I'll come down and help you. I'm in the 9th grade. I said, I'll come down and help you. Now, I got a lot of confidence in myself. Even though I'm in confidence music-wise, I had confidence in myself as a person. So I figured he's going to bring me up in the front office. He's going to teach me the front office. First day I get there, you know, I get told to go in the back room the first 2-3 days. And after about the 3rd day, I walked into this room and I shut the door, and I'm like Marlon Brando. You know, like that strut that Marlon had in the early 50s. He had some great movies. He was just my idol, you know, like the way he was such a, you know, nonconformist, and, you know. And I sat down with my father, I go, "Do you know who I am?" That's exactly how I said. I go, "Do you know who I am?" I expected, anyway, he goes, "You got to learn the business, blah, blah, blah." And so 4 years, I went back in the back room. Then I went to college for him as like an economics major, and then worked for him for 4.5 years. And the other blog, you'll see that in 1970, that's all I could take. And out the door I went. So we never got along that well at all. We just clashed. I think the reason being is he saw, especially when I became like a hippie in 1970 and we started playing guitar and started singing, because he was not a movie producer or director, all he wanted to do was crush my dreams. That was his joy. So instead of me just realizing where he came from, we had this yelling match back and forth with each other, wasted a lot of years. Not really wasted, because I think there's not really any regrets in life to me. You get to where you are. Anyway, 2004, 2 years before he passed away, I never hugged him. He never would let me hug him. And we're down in the parking lot of his condo in Florida, and it was Christmas Eve. I was getting ready to go back to my friend Lauren's house, and he reached out and grabbed me and hugged me. It was amazing. I don't know why. It just, maybe he felt like death was near. And it was funny, like, he had this condo on the 8th floor, overlooking around A1A, where he could see over the top of the smaller buildings right out to the ocean. And then he could walk out to on his outside deck and look and see the inland waterway in the back. So the guys that owned the condo charged him $5,000, put new rugs and new wallpaper in it, and he knew it could have been done for $2,000 in his eyes. So he figured they're making $3,000 on him, so he got mad. And his girlfriend at the time had a dog, and they caught him with the dog and yelled at him. And so he sells the condo, and we'd have it today. It was 3 bedrooms on the 8th floor, like I said. So he's trying to make excuses as we got some workers coming up, taking the stuff to the trucks to load up. And he's real sheepish about, because he knows that all of us were like dumbfounded that he would sell that condo. And so he's trying to make excuses. He goes, look at the salt there it does to the wallpaper. It had pulled it away from the wall, maybe a 1/4 inch in one spot. I said, Pa, come here. Look out the window. You see the pond out there? That's the Atlantic Ocean. The reason it doesn't have salt air, because you're in Nebraska, is because they don't have the pond to look at. We've got the pond here. And some lady that was like, wasn't from America, stole something out of his trash compactor, and he's screaming about her, and there's people that are sort of non-minorities, like loading his truck up with paintings, and I'm looking at them going, what can I tell you, buddy? From the old school, I said, don't take it personal. They did. They laughed. They realized, he's an old fart. So, yeah, I'm going to have a lot of other stories. I'm going to make a second blog here from my father. So, yeah, love and peace.